Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I'm going to be doing something wildly different. For anyone new here, I normally post gaming videos, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we're going to be building a keyboard, more specifically the Contra 40% keyboard. I got this from an online shop called Keycap. And if you like how it looks and want to get one for yourself, I'll leave the link in the description. I believe that there's a sort of stigma around mech keyboards, and a lot of people think that all of them are super expensive. I'd like to show that there are kits out there that are super cheap. I do agree that there are quite a few aspects about the hobby that are fairly expensive, but if you know where to look and what to look for, you can find some pretty affordably priced kits, as well as parts. While cheap, around $36 with the build kit and the controller, this board isn't really a perfect for beginners board, as it requires a lot of soldering, and its layout and size are not really for the average consumer. Nonetheless, if you want to attempt to build this, the link is there if you need it. Also, before I forget, make sure to read the description on the store page. There's a build guide which you'll need, and a link for the compiled firmware, which you'll need to load onto the keyboard itself upon completion. As you can see, this is not a normal keyboard. For those who don't know anything about keyboards, looking at your laptop or PC, or even your phone, you'll notice that your keys are offset. This is referred to as a staggered layout. Almost every keyboard is like this, of course. For the keyboard enthusiast that wants something a little more niche, there is something called an ortholinear keyboard. Instead of the keys being staggered, they are aligned perfectly above each other, like in this case. This means that some of the aspects of the keyboard are a little different, namely the spacebar. I understand that a lot of people might find this weird, and I'd agree. I have built a few keyboards, one of them entirely from scratch, like this one. It is also a 40%, although it's got a split spacebar and a staggered layout. Both of these boards are completely soldered together, and if you're building your first keyboard, I'd recommend something a little more plug and play. Many keyboard kits are hot swappable, which means you can simply push a switch into place and it's good to go. No need to worry about not having a soldering iron or soldering crappy joints. Let me give you a quick rundown of the kind of things you're going to need for this job, assuming you're following along, which I kind of doubt you are. First up, we're going to need a soldering iron station. Don't forget the soldering iron itself. We'll need the power supply for that said soldering iron. Pretty important if you ask me. That cable, there we go, that's a little better. Maybe not. We're also going to need some soldering wire, a tip cleaner. We're also going to need a switch opener, some lube, a thing in a container. We're also going to need tweezers and a brush. We got some dielectric grease, a cardboard box. We got some cool stickers that came with some of the packages that I bought. Okay. For a little added fun, I'm going to add a toy that a lot of children love to play with. And that's everything you're going to need. Voila. If you're building a keyboard and it's going to require a lot of soldering like this one, I'd recommend you buy a fan or something to direct the fumes away from you, because they're not good for you, for one, and it's pretty hard to do a lot of soldering when you've constantly got to blow fumes out of your face or something, because they'll hurt your eyes quite a bit, honestly. So I decided to pick up this small fan, which is literally just connected to your PC via USB-C, and it does a pretty good job. One thing I'd like to mention is that this video took several days to record, which is why my voice may sound different. I'm really tired. For those of you who aren't interested in the numbers, 40% means that a lot of keys on a normal sized keyboard are going to be gone. At this percentage, you usually don't get numbers, many symbols, and a lot of your larger keys will have been shrunk down or altered, like my Mercutio, the board that I just showed you. A key's size is denominated by how many units it takes up on the board, one switch being 1 unit. For instance, a lot of space bars are 6 or 7 units. A lot of shift keys are 2 units, often being slightly bigger than that, I believe. The space bar on this keyboard is 2 units. As I mentioned, you are missing a lot of keys, and like a phone with its emoji menu and symbols menu, a smaller keyboard is going to have this too. These are called layers and can be activated by holding down a button. The smaller the keyboard gets, the more you rely on layers. At 40%, unless you're doing some very simple typing without any punctuation and spelling all the numbers, you won't use layers that much, but you're gonna need layers. Holding the button down essentially swaps the keys over to a custom programmed key layout. With this size, you're going to be doing that lots, and I wouldn't really recommend your first mechanical keyboard to be something so small. It really hinders its practicality, and typing on it isn't something I'd like to do a lot. I used to use my Mercutio a lot, but the amount I had to rely on layers got annoying to deal with. This keyboard is for entertainment. Someone who wants something fun and unique to type on. You can daily it, but it would take a lot of patience to transition to something so inefficient. Also, side note, yes, I do kind of have long hair. You can kind of see me in the top left corner. I don't think you can see my face though. Any shots that do have my face, I'm probably gonna remove. Yeah. Sorry guys, this is not a face reveal video. Occasionally I'm going to bring up some hardware specs, and for this build I was going to use KTT Meowoos, I think that's what they're called, but as you'll find out near the end of the video, things went horribly wrong, and my choice of switches is gonna change. I'm gonna give you a quick little tutorial on how to loop switches. Now the first thing you're gonna need is a switch opener, as you can see, and it basically has 4 prongs here that open up the switch. This is my switch right here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna press it into this thing, this switch opener, and it's gonna basically lift up 4 prongs on each side. I'll give you some B-roll to show what I'm talking about, but these switches have been pretty stubborn, and sometimes you just have a switch like that, it doesn't want to come apart. There we go. Let's see if I can get you nice and close in here. Okay, now that you're nice and up close and personal, this is the stem. Obviously that's a spring. That's the bottom housing. This is the top housing. We don't want to loop the top nor bottom housing. All of our lubing efforts are going to go towards the stem and the spring. If you're going to be doing a lot of this, I'd suggest you get a handy tool like this. It's got these little prongs in here, and it is, well, you can't really see that, can you? And you just grab the stem like that. I'm going to set that aside. And let me grab my lube. If you want to use a special lubricant, I'm using Krytox 205 grade 0. Get a lube that is meant to be used for switch lubing. You don't want to use something like dielectric grease or lithium grease or anything like that. Get something that is meant for it. Now, I got my lube right here. I'm going to take a small dollop and I'm going to apply that to both sides of the spring. See if I can keep this in shot. Both sides of the spring. And once I've done that, I'm going to smear it all over the inside and the outside. Flip it over and do the same thing on that side. Ideally, you want to have a nice, dull, milky sheen on the ends of your spring. Just to know that there's some lube there. You can go a tiny bit heavy on the lube with your springs, but the inside of this bottom housing has a well, and if you get lube in that, the plunger on your stem is going to create a sort of suction seal in that, and it's going to make you have a very sticky switch feel, which you do not want. So now you just want to pop that spring back in. I'm going to grab my stem, and what lube I have left over on my brush, I'm just going to evenly distribute it on the stem. When you're lubing a stem, it's important to go light on the lube. That's why I didn't add some extra, because if you add too much, obviously you're going to get a very sticky, gummy switch feel. You only want to lube the back, the two sides. They've got these little nubs on them. These are kind of like the guides that slide into the bottom housing. They've got that on both sides. And then the front. The front has these little legs here, and the legs on your switch might be a tiny bit different depending on what kind of switch it is, whether it be a linear, tactile, or God forbid clicky. You just want to do a light coat of lube on those, and then once you're done that, you just set it back down on the spring. Make sure the legs are facing that little leaf spring right there. You do not want them to be facing the other way, otherwise it will not go together, and you might break your switch trying to get it to. Now once we've done that, we're going to put on our top housing. Make sure this little hole on the top is facing away from the leaf spring. Now you're just going to slide it over like that and press it together. Just like that. And you've got a looped switch. Occasionally on some of the switches, you will get a bent pin. It's not broken, but you will have to straighten it out. And I just use a pair of tweezers, the back, and just kind of push it back into place. Be careful as to not make it worse or break the pin off, but just straighten it out and it's good to go. It's another day. Anyways, I'd like to say that at this stage in the keyboard build, a lot of it is going to be me putting things in place. It's pretty boring, so I am going to skip to a part that is a little more interesting, or, you know, try to show a little bit of variety. It's not like you want to watch me stick diodes into a PCB for half an hour, so I'll just save you guys the time and I'll skip ahead a little. Okay, at this stage I was going over some of the components that came with the build, and I noticed that I was missing a little switch, just a tiny button that you gotta solder on the PCB, and it didn't come for some reason. So unfortunately I did have to take one off of my other keyboard, my little Mercutio, which was very disheartening, but it had to be done. After I desoldered that other switch and taken it off the board, I got to work on soldering in place all of the little diodes that I had stuck into the PCB. It's a very tedious process, and for some reason I enjoy it. I don't know. Something about it is kind of fun to me. Not really much to say here, I'm afraid. All I'm really doing at this stage is just trimming off the excess legs on each of the diodes, so that I don't get acupunctured every time I try to rest it on my lap or something. Don't really know why I'd be resting it on my lap and not my desk, but you get the point. It's very sharp and we want to do something about that. And now for some very horrible camera audio that adds a nice home-baked aspect. Okay, right now I'm going to be soldering on these headers. There are 2 of them.
I think he's got relatives
They
over.
are made to mount up with the little USB-C controller right here. We're not gonna solder this on just yet. We need to put on the switches and then we're gonna do this. So yeah, right now I'm just putting on the headers. Okay, with that out of the way, I started to solder on the headers, and this is kind of where I ran into my first issue a little ways down the road. I know for a fact that you probably cannot read that, but it's basically telling me that I need to put the USB-C controller right there on that side. I didn't realize it at the time, but I soldered the headers on the wrong side. I've got to desolder all of those. I only had to desolder the headers, which in and of itself was a very painstaking and brutal process, and I even managed to break one of the headers, which sucked, but I did manage to hodgepodge them together. It was a painful process, but I did get it fixed. My headers look like dog shit now, and I even snapped one of them in half, but they work. They mount up to the controller, and that's all that matters. You're going to be hearing some more of that crappy camera audio because I recorded it with a camera that doesn't have a mic input for some reason. When you're going to install your switches, make sure that these little pins on the back line up with the holes in your board. You do not want to install this upside down, otherwise you'll just bend all of the pins. So make sure that the side with the hole is facing down. It should just pop in nice and snug. Make sure to give it a once over to see if it's sitting nice and flat before you solder, because trust me, it is a nightmare to fix. From here, I just started to solder in all of the switches and also press them into the keyboard as I went. Okay, from here it's really starting to look like a keyboard, albeit a bit of a weird one. Now we're going to start putting on the keycaps. The keycaps I chose for this build are the black on white with some accents by Keycap. There's a lot to learn about keycaps and keycap profiles, but I do not want to bore you with that topic as it is long, boring, and overall kind of confusing. I'll sum up the general gist of it by saying that different keycap profiles will change the way your keyboards sound, but depending on what your keyboard is made out of, some of the materials used in it, as well as your switch choice, will affect the sound greatly as well. Alright, so now I'm going to start putting on all of the keycaps. We've got quite a bit of choices here and a lot of tough decisions to make, as well as the fact that this specific keycap set is not 100% meant for an ortholinear keyboard, which means that I'm actually gonna have to substitute some keys with other ones, and occasionally I'll have like weird layout, such as the escape key, which I just put down. After it, I put down the normal QWERTY sequence, and you can notice that the escape key is a little raised compared to the rest. That is because it is not meant to be in the second row, which in this place would be the first row. So Yeah, but it's fine. We roll with it. It's gonna be okay.
Wow. Look at that. That's awesome. Wow.
Initially, I was super excited. Everything looked amazing. The keyboard sounded great. But there was one issue. Something you kind of need in order to actually use a keyboard. It has to be working. That's right. Somewhere along the line, I messed something up. Maybe it's the cracked headers. Maybe it's the fact that I had to desolder and resolder the USB-C controller because I soldered it the wrong way. Either way, the keyboard didn't show up in my file explorer. And it didn't want to enter bootloading mode, which means I couldn't upload the firmware. And it was basically just a paperweight. I tried everything I could to find a way to get the keyboard to work. I did a lot of troubleshooting. I tried different cables. I tried different devices. Like I mentioned earlier, I had to desolder the controller and resolder it in a different position as I apparently didn't read close enough to one of the comments on the store page. The specific controller I used is wired a little differently than the controller they recommend you use, and the pinouts were slightly different, meaning that you had to be careful which way you soldered it. I didn't know this, and I soldered it the wrong way. I was distraught, huffing enormous amounts of copium. What could I have done wrong? I even resorted to many various substances to quell my aching sadness. Okay, that's enough of the over-dramatization. It's not that bad. As far as I knew it, the board was dead. There wasn't really much else to do, unless I wanted to spend literal hours of troubleshooting trying to figure out what the issue could be. That would mean taking the whole board apart, unfortunately, and I'm very, very bad at desoldering. In order to avoid the whole process, I just ordered a new one. It was cheap enough and available, and I wouldn't have to worry about any of the aforementioned issues. So I waited. And I waited some more. Anyways, I got the board and I built it. Everything went off without a hitch. Everything worked smoothly and the board works. Some of you more keen viewers will notice the different switches. These are the blue cheese switches bought from Keycap. And honestly, I think they sound a little better than the KTT Meows. They almost have a deeper sound to them. And I also put in a different stabilizer. The other one, I would have had to tear that keyboard completely apart in order to get to it. I tried to record the satisfaction of pulling the film off of the backplate for this keyboard. It was a little stubborn, as you can see, and I did struggle a fair bit, but I got something, at least. It's kind of satisfying. Alright, moving on. I'm now starting to swap the keycaps over to the new board, and this is mainly for the typing test and of course the shots, the B-roll, the thumbnail, all of that, but I did actually get a different set of keycaps. They're the KAT Explosions, and they are an ortholinear set, so they've got a specialized profile, and they have the correct keys. From here, the keyboard is done. The keycaps are in place, everything works, and it's time to get a good look at it before I do a typing test.
Oh boy.
Like I said, this keyboard is an ortholinear. Its layout is different, and very many of the keys are different size. And even I'm not used to it. As you can see, I'm struggling pretty bad. But near the end, I had one good run. Okay. That's as best as I can do right now. This thing is a trick. 67 words per minute is all I could get. I know maybe to some of you that's good, but to me that's about half of what I could do when I'm using any regular keyboard. But as time goes on, I'll get more used to it. This is probably something I'll type on just for fun or occasionally, but I really enjoyed this. It was a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. This has been a real journey, many hours of footage, many days, weeks spent preparing and following through with all of this, but I finally finished it and got it to a point where I feel it's at least presentable for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did, and thank you for watching. Have a good night.